Hey, what's going on? You're now tuned in to the PVD Horror Podcast. I'm Brandon, and I'm joined by my co-host Dave. Today we have a special guest. He's a director, writer, and producer. Joining us today is Mick Davis. Thanks for joining us, Mick.
Thanks for
Today,
having
no problem. Today we're going to talk about his new film, Walden, which is set to release in select theaters November 10th, 2023, and will be on demand and on digital December 12th.
If you like all things horror and want to get the best horror news, interviews, and reviews,
Like, subscribe, and ring that bell to follow us and satisfy all your horror needs. November 10th, 2023, and will be on demand and on digital December 12th. So we'll get into that. Yeah. Mick, so you were born in Scotland and your dream was always to move to Hollywood. You finally made that dream come true. What was the motivation like to get where you are today?
to get to hell out of Scotland
Yeah.
because it's so cold there. But and be in LA, I'm like every kid who grows up loving movies. Some people want to go make them. Some people are quite happy to just go watch them. For me, I just made up my mind as a very young kid that I was gonna be in LA making movies. And the only distraction I had before it was I used to be in professional soccer, and I was a coach in professional soccer. And it just so happened that the team I was with had a very famous supporter, Rod Stewart.
Okay.
And Rod, I told Rod, he came to a game one day and I said to him, listen, I really want to go to LA and make movies. And he said to me, well, why don't you come to LA and coach my team and maybe you'll meet some folks and things will happen. And I came for 6 months and that was over 30 years ago. So there you have it.
wow.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Now, what are some things that you miss back at home, and what are some things that you enjoy doing in LA?
I miss the pubs
Yeah.
and I miss the food, even as bad as it is. And
Yeah.
I miss the banter, we'll say in Gaelic, the crack, the conversation between guys is fantastic. So
Mm,
I just love all of that. And I keep in touch with lots of folks there. So
that's
I
good.
still get a piece of it.
What's the
Nice.
difference between a pub there and a pub here or a bar
Uh,
here?
Authenticity.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, the pubs there, to be fair to LA, I mean, the pubs in Glasgow, some of them are over 200 years old.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're kind of almost as old as the States or the America is itself in terms of from Washington on. So yeah, and that's kind of and then of course you've got guys in pubs there that just they've been barflies their whole life, and they have great stories to tell, and the vibe is great, and you can smell the beer and the carpet and everything else. So,
Okay.
but it's a lot cleaner here in LA, thank God. But I still miss that reality of the pubs there. So,
Yeah. Now, can you tell us what inspired you to become a filmmaker?
well, I grew up watching obviously so many great movies, so many great actors like Bogart, Burt
Mm,
Lancaster, and Lana Turner, people like that, all these great actors and actresses. But it was The Godfather. When I watched The Godfather and the ensemble of brilliance, Cannes and Pacino and Brando and Duvall, and I thought to myself, can you imagine? Can you imagine actually being on the floor with those guys and
mm.
getting those performances and that was it for me. And I said, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do that. And it took me a while, but eventually, I got there. So that was my inspiration, was The Godfather.
Now, are you a horror fan at all? More of a thriller? Because I mean, this film kind of dabbles in a little bit of both genres.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I kind of go across the board when it comes to genres. I mean, I made a movie called The Invisible, I made the Swedish version of it, and
Oh,
then made the American version of it, which was a supernatural thriller with a little bit of horror in it. I did a horror called Haunting Charles Manson, because I always liked the idea of what if Roman Polanski could get one day with Manson, what would he do, you know? And then, and I would say I'm probably sitting on about 4 or 5 horror scripts that I'm really looking forward to making. One is called The Piper, which is a modern version of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And I want to set that in the Northwest somewhere. So I have a bunch of horrors that I do. And The Exorcist, for me, I watch it maybe once a month
Okay.
because it's just so fucking brilliant. It's so beautifully made.
yeah.
And I knew I got to know Linda Blair because she was dating a friend of mine, so I had a lot of questions for her. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that, and yeah, I think Walden does sort of, tip the toe in the horror genre. So I like that, and
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
intentional, you know.
Let me ask you a question about something you just mentioned. So you were talking about an adaptation for the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Yeah.
In your opinion, is the Pied Piper an evil character, or is he just somebody who was wronged?
Well, you just gave me goosebumps because no one's ever asked me that question. It's been
Hmm.
read by my agents and stuff, but no
Yeah,
one's asked. That is a brilliant question, and the answer is he's a good character
so I thought.
because I had to build him a backstory because it's basically just a poem and a window and a fable, but I had to build him a backstory, and ultimately he is someone who is there to protect children.
Yeah,
It was off in the beginning as he's brought this colony of rats with him, and you think that he's evil, but ultimately his end game is to protect children. And with what's going on today, and my story is about this small island, and where there's a lot of fracking going on, and kids are suffering as a result of it. And the kind of hero of the story is a 12-year-old kid who has a growth on his back as a result of the water he's contaminated by the fracking and whatever else is going on. And the piper arrives to fix things. And you think that he's there to take people out, but he's actually there to protect the children. So yes, he's a good guy.
nice, nice. That I agree with you on the character as well.
There you go. It's great that you know about him. That's brilliant.
So you brought up that you like your friends with Rod Stewart. How did you guys meet?
It was only, I was the coach at Celtic, the club I was with,
Okay.
Glasgow Celtic, and Rod is a fan of Glasgow Celtic. If you ever see Rod on stage, he's always wearing a Celtic jersey and kicking soccer balls into the audience. And he just happened to be at a game, and I just cornered him, and I said, I'd love to go to LA. He got talking to me, and I said, I'd love to go to LA and try the movie business. And he said to me, well, I've got a soccer team there called the Exiles. If you ever want to come and coach them, and then maybe you'll get to meet some people. And I was like, cool. So when I left Celtic, I thought I had enough money for 6 months in LA. And I thought, well, I'll give it 6 months. And I met some people. I wrote a script called Paganini, which was read by someone who gave it to CAA. They read it, gave it to Scorsese. Scorsese read it and said, you got to sign this guy. And then the next thing I knew, I was having lunch with Mickey Rourke, and I spent 10 years working with Mickey.
There
Wow,
you go. That's
that's pretty
cool.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So you have worked with some big name actors over the years, such as Al Pacino, Mel Gibson, Tim Allen, Wesley Snipes, Jennifer
Yeah.
Love Hewitt, just to name a few.
Yeah.
What has been the major highlight in your career so far?
Well, working with those guys, I mean, sitting with Al Pacino came to visit me in Paris. I was in Paris working on a script that we were going to do, which I eventually made with Andy Garcia, called Modigliani, about the painter from 1920.
Okay.
But Al was the original Modigliani for me, and we spent about 3 years working on it. And Al came to Paris, and I think the highlight was sitting in the car with him, going through the streets of Paris. And he's talking to me. He said, Bob has twins too. He was talking about his own kids are twins. And I'm thinking, who is Bob? So I asked him, I said, Bob. He goes, yeah, Bob De Niro.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm so privileged he's calling Robert De Niro Bob to me.
Yeah.
And then I'm pinching myself because I had written the script in such a way that he said to me, you know, what we did in Godfather 2 with the flashbacks, I love what you've done with the Modigliani script. It reminds me of Godfather 2. And I'm saying to myself, this can't be real. I'm sitting with Michael Corleone, and he's telling me that I'm doing a good job on a script. So that was a highlight. And then the other highlights of, yeah, all those names that you've mentioned, just working with them, and you know, they treat you as an equal in the sense that you're there to do a job. You're not there for an autograph or for a photo op. You're there to do a job.
Yeah.
And they trust you that you know that you will understand what they're looking for as an actor and for character. And then I think the other highlight was shooting Modigliani with Andy Garcia, because I'd wanted to make that movie since I was a kid. And so there I was, and Andy was all dressed up as Modigliani, and it was just yeah, it's one of those things that live with you forever, you know. And
Yeah.
then the other highlight would be when Coppola came to the premiere of Modigliani. And I told him, I said, I stole some ideas from you. I hope you don't mind. He says, well, if you're going to steal, you may as well steal from the best.
Nice.
Which is what he said to me, which is cool, you know.
That is, it's surreal, actually. All of that, driving around with Al Pacino as he's referencing Robert De Niro. That's those are incredible moments.
Yeah.
So your latest film, and the one that we're here to talk about today, Walden, is well, let me turn it over to you. Could you give our audience a brief synopsis of what this film's about?
Well, it's about it's set in a small town in Georgia, and it's about a courtroom stenographer who has basically blended into the background and lives a life of insignificance, and lives lonely, very lonely life, and observes everything in the courtroom, and goes home with all that pain that people bring to the courtroom.
Yeah.
He boxes it and he puts it away in the room. And then when he finds out there is something wrong with him in his health, something clicks inside him. And he then decides, I can't let these criminals away with what they've done. So he decides to become a vigilante and goes after them. But ironically, at the very same time, he ends up in something of a love story. So he has to choose between his path of vigilante or to leave that behind and go for the love story. So that was the dichotomy that I left Walden with.
Nice.
Okay. So this project was really special to you. Can you talk about some things that helped you create the story and also creating the character Walden himself?
Yeah, sure. I'd always been fascinated by court stenographers because nobody cares about them. They are the ghost of the courtroom. They sit there front and center. They take down every single word. They don't get to speak. They pack up the machine. They go home. And then I watched the Johnny Depp trial, and everybody's eyes are on Johnny or Amber Heard. And I'm watching the stenographer, and it's this lady, and I'm thinking to myself, does she go home and take care of her husband or her kids? Does she feed her cats and then put on a costume, jump off a building and save people's lives? And I thought, what if a stenographer who on the face of it has a very simple, boring life is actually living a dark secret? And the name Walden just came into my head, and being a James Dean fan, I then said Walden Dean. And then from that point on, I saw a bow tie in my head. And then when I got on the phone with the producers who asked me, who wanted to make a movie with me, and they said, what do you want to do? What kind of movie? And I said, I want to do a movie about a stenographer. And they kind of looked at each other as if, okay, this was a bad idea. And then I said, but stenographer with a difference, who becomes a vigilante. And they kind of perked up and went, we like that. So
Mhm.
we commenced the script, and I was in London at the time working on something else. I started Walden, and I never came up for air until 2 weeks later when I had the draft done, and that was it.
Nice.
Nice. Now I feel everyone that was involved in this film, from the cast and the crew, did a great job, you know. So what was it like for you to just work with this cast?
Oh, it was a joy. You know, it's one of those things. I thought with Modigliani, I'd kind of reached the pinnacle in terms of working with wonderful actors
Mhm.
and an ensemble piece, as it were. But then when Emile came on board, and just the way he encapsulated Walden in every physical gesture and the
Mm.
voice, and I thought to myself, wow, I said, this is, I hope Stephen King sees this movie. I'd love to see what he thinks about Walden. Would Walden be a guy that he would have written about? Uh, and the joy of bringing those other actors on board, because Kelly Garner, for instance, who plays the love interest in the story, who played Marilyn Monroe before, and she's a
Mhm.
wonderful actress. And she came in when she was so sassy and she was so full of zest. And she said to me, I am going to engulf this guy. I'm going to overwhelm this guy. Are you cool
Mhm.
with it? Like I said, absolutely.
Hmm.
And she had so much fun doing that. And then my two cops, Shane and Tanya, they were a great match, because I told Shane, this is your town, you're born and raised here, and you have to partner up with someone who's came from LA because she's fell in love with someone. She's in small town Georgia. She's so used to LA, she thinks all she's going to deal with in Georgia is maybe a kid stealing a bicycle or a parking ticket or something. But lo and behold, she's actually right in the middle of what she was used to in LA with what's going on. And that is, the serial killings and everything else. So, and all of these actors really embraced the story, because I think for them, it was kind of, nothing is unique, but I think it felt kind of original to them. And they brought some wonderful ideas to it, especially Emile. And that's the thing is that as long as you're serving the story, I'm all for actors bringing fresh ideas and dialogue ideas and nuances to it, as long as it serves the story.
Yeah. We've had the privilege of being able to check out a few of Emile's like more recent works just because of this podcast. And I
Yeah.
have to say he's such like a phenomenal actor in my opinion. I think he is one of those actors who's really able to just like get in fully into the character that he's trying to portray and become believable.
Yeah.
And he totally does that in this one. Like it's almost like looks like he like loses himself and
Yeah.
you truly believe the character he's trying to portray. I really like the way that he's kind of evolved as an actor, and I hope that he continues to get more roles because he's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I was texting him yesterday after I'd done a bunch of these interviews, and people were raving about him and saying how, one guy said in particular he felt it was Emile's best performance ever, because he had lost himself in the role and
Yeah,
became Walden.
Mhm.
And he was so happy to hear that, because and for him, Into the Wild was a great
yeah,
movie, right?
yep.
Emil said, I can't let Walden go. I just love him so much, and I just love being him.
Mhm.
And the simplicity of what Walden is, and the charm of Walden, and that's it. And I told him when I started with him, I says, you have to see yourself as the Pillsbury Dough man with a
Mhm.
bow tie, and if anybody prodded your tummy, that you would just chuckle and smile,
Yeah,
but you become something else.
right.
And he
Mhm.
and he held on to that, and it shows, I think, in the performance. So yeah, I think it's all about casting. Scorsese said that, right?
Mhm.
A movie is about 98% casting and 2% luck. And it could have been somebody else who, from a physicality point of view, would have been totally different. But Emile's stature and the way his comportment and the way he moved was just Walden.
Yeah, Absolutely. This film touched on a few things, and I wanted to just kind of throw them out there to you and kind of see what your thoughts are, and if this was some of the themes that you were trying to capture with this film. The first one that really was like coming to me as I was watching the film is this idea of the concept of vicarious trauma. So it's the trauma, it's not the direct trauma, it's the trauma from the people who are working with people who have experienced trauma or are hearing about trauma all day long. For example, Brandon and I work with individuals with disabilities. A lot of them have really traumatic pasts. We hear about that stuff all the time, or we watch people get assaulted and, you know, things like that. So we are kind of like taking in vicarious trauma all the time. And this, you're exactly right. Nobody ever thinks about the stenographer, the person in the courtroom hearing all the heinous acts and like in graphic detail.
Yeah.
And they're expected to sit there and transcribe and not have a reaction and not be able to say, hey, I need a timeout. They have to sit there through that. So this idea of like how they experience vicarious trauma and how that probably impacts them. I thought that this was such a genius way to explore that in a job profession that nobody would have considered.
And that's a lovely compliment. I think it was, you know, that you try when you're coming up with a character to find something a little bit different so you can explore it, and hopefully it grows into something like Walden did. And I think that's exactly it. He's absorbing all the pain, and all the angst, and all the letdown, and all the wrong decisions that happen in courtrooms, as we know, every day. And a judge gets to speak. The jury gets to speak. Defense and prosecution gets to speak. Witnesses get to speak. But the one person that has to keep their mouth shut and do their job is the stenographer. And yet that one person is absorbing all of this and then taking it home with them. And I spoke, we had a couple of technical advisors on the movie who were real stenographers, and they were brilliant stenographers. And I asked one of them, I says, how do you feel when you go home at night with this stuff? Do you let it go? Or he says, you can't let it go. He said, it's like law enforcement. You know, a cop, a detective, they see these terrible things. If they can't solve the crime, it eats away at them. And it really becomes a personal sort of voyage where they've got to travel through life knowing that they couldn't fix things for people who either were hurt, damaged, or wronged. And the stenographer sits there and probably has a really good take on whether the person is guilty or not guilty, but still can't get to speak about it. And that in itself is monumental in terms of what's building up inside. And if Walden, who is 3 generations of stenographer, is taking all these cases home and boxing them up in a spare bedroom, think about what's in that bedroom. You know, it's like, you know, someone can say to you, you've got furniture there that your grandfather had, and he had a terrible ending in his life. You should get rid of the furniture because it has bad energy. Well, think about the bad energy that's boxed up in Walden's spare room. And yet he lives with it. And you have to ask yourself, why is he doing that? And my answer to Emile was, because he wants to keep the pain away from people, and he's willing to live with it himself. But of course, then eventually the volcano erupts, and he has to do something about it. And that's ultimately why he changes in the story. So
and then this film too, you know, Walden he takes on everyone else's issues and everything that's going on, but he also deals with his own, you know, from the flashbacks and everything of him growing up and trying to sit there and move on with his life, and still trying to figure out and piece together like what really happened, like, you know what I mean? And then still trying to be just this normal person, just doing his regular job every day, you know? So like, where did you get that inspiration from to also add that other layer into this equation for Walden?
Well, I think that what I wanted to do was the father was a stenographer and a quiet, placid man, went about his business and did his job. And it just wasn't enough for his wife. His wife wanted to live her life. And there are a lot of people like that. That you can't, there's nothing wrong with someone wanting to live life. And the father just never had it in him to meet her needs or her wants or her desires. And of course, what did the mom do? She turns to drink. And then for her, she begins to detach herself from the child. And of course, that's traumatic for any child. And what my child does, what my young Walden does, instead of pulling out his toys and playing with them, he gets his father's old steno machine and teaches himself how to become his father. Yeah. And that kind of blocks out the noise for him, but it didn't. And the trauma has lived with him. And I think that's another reason why, because a lot of children will go through traumatic experiences in their life with their parents, and they will blame themselves for what happened, especially when parents break up. Kids will say, it was my fault. If it wasn't for me, mom and dad would still be together. So that, coupled with him bringing home the pain of the courtroom, is almost like self-infliction. It's almost like I have to suffer because of what I did as a child. And ultimately, as we progress in the story, we realize, but there's nothing but innocence in Walden, He's just one of life's lonely figures who's trying to, navigate himself until he gets to his end. But things change and he becomes who he becomes.
The phrase that Walden uses at one point is that he's a ghost in the courtroom. Yeah. And I absolutely love that phrase. But I also think that what he's experiencing is something that many of us experience, is he's becoming his work. Like, he never separates, right? So he's taking his work home. There's just always that idea that he is, and he can't even take a break from it for his medical conditions, that are happening. He's, feeling so much pressure, and he has to do this. Like you said, he has become his dad, and he doesn't know how to separate from that. He's lost in his work. And to him, it's almost like he feels completely invisible as a person. I really love how Ghost in the Courtroom is such a strong way to describe that experience of becoming who we are, and in that relation to our work, ghost in whatever that it is that we're doing as a job. Where did that come from for you?
I think it was, I've always maintained, and I may have used it in another movie, I don't know, and if I didn't, I'm going to use it at some point. I think that that the worst disease for mankind is loneliness. It's not cancer, it's not something else, it's loneliness, because there's so many lonely people in the world that nobody gives a damn about, and they have to just go through life and accept that. And maybe they never find love, maybe they never find friendships, maybe they have the inability to develop even conversation. And so when I was writing it, that line was sort of the first line that I had in my head, with almost like a soliloquy from Walden, because when I watched that woman in the Johnny Depp trial, I thought, she's a ghost. Nobody sees her. Everybody's fixed on Johnny. Everybody's fixed on Amber. Nobody sees this woman. And yet she is the glue for the entire case, because every single word is being transcribed by her. Yeah. And there's not even a thank you at the end of it. So she doesn't exist. And yesterday someone said to me that I'm the ghost of the courtroom is a T-shirt, and they were talking about a few of the lines in the movie, and one of them was that line. Yeah. And I said, well, it genuinely is a painful line for Walden to say, because he's telling her, when he says, I'm the ghost of the courtroom, he's really saying nobody sees me, and nobody sees me in life. And I don't know how to deal with it when somebody does want to see me like her, like the love story. Mm-hmm. And the tragedy of it is he desperately would love to be like all of us. Everybody wants to be loved, but most people just can't handle it. because they're just not designed for it. They're not wired for it. And so they have to continue in that lonely state. So that's why I gave him that line, that I'm the ghost of the courtroom. And I jot down every word, every lie, every truth, and all of that. And yet I pack up my machine and I go home because nobody cares about me. And the only person who will even give him the time of day was the surrogate father that I created in the judge. And that in itself is only a veneer. It's, how are you? Do you want to have breakfast? Yeah. And nothing more than that. No depth to it at all. That's just pleasantry. So ultimately, you know, he goes home to all that pain and angst that he stored in a room. And that's where the ghost sees himself, you know. He sees himself amongst boxes and boxes of ghostly figures floating around inside that room.
Yeah, I think you're nailing it with as far as that inability to be loved. And like, you have to be able to at least acknowledge yourself or see yourself or be able to handle yourself in order to allow other people in your life, right? And that's kind of the issue with Walden, is he can't even look at himself. So how is he going to let anybody else in? So all of his relationships are exactly like you said. They're all superficial and just surface level relationships. The one person who he starts to let in, he quickly kind of like puts up walls, you know?
Right. And we all do that. We're all guilty of that at some point in our life because we're scared. We're really scared of opening up and letting ourselves be vulnerable and letting our emotions be shown. And that's why the scene in the movie, if you remember, he's in the elevator and she comes in and she kind of imposes herself on him. And she's asking him questions about his life and who he is and his past and stuff. Well, that scene actually was supposed to be in a car on a flatbed driving around the small streets of that town. But we were in a building getting ready to shoot something else. And I saw the elevator and I thought to myself, I'm getting out of the car and I'm going to put him in the elevator because it will be claustrophobic. And I think it'll be much more beautiful than him sitting in a car talking.
Yeah.
And the producers were happy because I saved them a few bucks. But at the same time, I think it worked better because it told us something about him that, you know, he's not prepared. So he puts a steno machine up between him and her. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember a movie called Remains of the Day with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. But if you ever get a chance to sort of like just whiz through it and check it out, there's a scene where she traps him in a corner and imposes herself on him, and he has a book in his hand and he uses the book to protect himself. So I stole the idea from that.
Oh, okay.
And that's how it became. And that was me saying, this is who this guy is. This is who he is, you know? So
I love that. Using like the body language to kind of highlight who the character is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I was having this thought about the idea of stenographers. I'm like, it's not going to leave my head. I think that this was such a genius profession to like highlight, because I can't think of a time I've ever really put this much thought into it. But you really, if you think about it, it's such a thankless job, but also you can only fail. Like nobody leaves the courtroom and like tells them, great job today. There's no success. There's just an expectation that you're supposed to do your job correctly,
right?
Or you failed. So for him, like his way of trying to find some way of getting like recognition or acknowledgement that for being anything is this competition that he's trying to, you know, be in. And he can't even handle it because he's so, the job is just kind of shut him down, and his body's like, you know, having reactions to the stress.
Absolutely.
And everything.
Well, he goes through a lot by the end of the movie, that's for sure. But you nailed it there. There's no promotion in being a stenographer. You don't get to be vice president stenographer or president stenographer. You're just the court reporter until the day you die, if that's your chosen profession. So you're not going anywhere. There's no ladder to climb being that person. So he's kind of stuck with that. But you know, we spoke with, we had technical advisors, and it turned out that the world champion stenographer there are competitions for stenographers, and the world champion is a guy, is an American dude, and I think it's 220 words a minute he can do or something bizarre like that. And that blew my mind. And I thought to myself, geez, the only outlet these people have is a little competition from time to time to see who's the best at what they do. But it's never going to be on the front page of any magazine or, you know, my friend, for instance, created and wrote Queen's Gambit, the show.
Yeah.
Yep.
His name is Alan Scott. He produced a movie for me years ago. He's another Scottish dude. And I told him I was doing, I says, you know, I said, Queen's Gambit was brilliant, Alan. How you took chess and turned it into something so fucking sexy blew my mind.
Yeah.
And it helped to have the actress who was wonderful. And I said, well, I'm about to embark on doing a movie about a stenographer with a twist. And when I told him, he just laughed. He said, that is going to be awesome. Because when you tell people you're doing a movie about a court reporter, they're going to go, how boring can you get? Of course, Walden changes all of that, you know?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so my final question about the film is, you have this character of General George. And I thought this was an interesting character to have in the film. It's not the first time we've seen somebody in a film with like intellectual disabilities, but what I liked about the character is, well, first of all, it kind of shows a sympathetic side of Walden, you know, which you already kind of would assume. But also there's a scene in the film where, you know, there's, without giving it in too much detail, a stereotype is made about individuals with, you know, intellectual disabilities and how their relationships might be with children. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to kind of add into the film. And I was curious, you know, what made you like add this character in?
Well, Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, Lenny.
Yeah.
I kind of based them on Lenny.
Okay.
The innocence of Lenny and Lenny's relationship with George. And I thought that was a beautiful, sad story. And so when I wanted to create the character who is like, you know, the one friend that Walden really has is a character that nobody really cares about in town, but Walden does.
Yeah.
And I also felt that, you know, we often judge a book by its cover, and it's so unfair. You know, there are so many people out there who suffer with disabilities, intellectual, physical, whatever that is. But instead of actually recognizing them, once again, he's kind of another ghost in the town.
Yeah.
As it were. And of course, it's easy to point the finger at the weakest link in the chain, which is the town. And of course, George is pure for me. General George is pure. And without getting too religious or spiritual about it, but that kind of purity has to be loved and cared for and not cast aspersions on or you know, be suspicious about. And I felt that George was great. He was a kind of a red herring in a sense. And I didn't want to just contrive him for that reason, but I wanted to say that the two likely souls met each other in town and found each other as friends. Walden, nobody cared about. General George, nobody cared about. And yet the two of them found each other and became friends, and Walden really, really cares about him. So in effect, General George is Lenny and Walden is George. George. And so that's what I wanted in the story. And you know, I'm a big Steinbeck fan, and that's what I aimed for. I just hope that it works for the audience. They don't have to know Steinbeck to know that's what I was aiming for, but I hope that they feel that that's what it is. And the cop in the story as well cares about George, and the cop has his doubts. Our LA cop doesn't, because our LA cop has to go straight for, the prime suspect, and her mind, her experience gives her that. But ultimately, that's the beauty of it, because there is a conscience, I like to think, for each of the characters.
Yeah.
And Shane's character is essentially the conscience for Tanya's character. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah. I always think of Frankenstein, the 1931 film, as like it's almost a version of Mice and Men, but it's missing like the George character. You just have the Lenny, and even in like the scene with the little girl in the water. So I do love that, how you kind of built that contrast with the characters kind of bouncing each other off in this film. And I just thought it was an interesting addition to the film, and I appreciated it. As I mentioned, Brandon and I both work in the field with individuals with intellectual disabilities. To see a character not play the stereotype, or it was kind of refreshing, and I just liked that it highlighted how frequently that happens, that people kind of accuse.
Well, it kind of happens too often, and we're so quick to jump and accuse these days because everything's moving at such a speed now. Nobody takes time to step back and look at things for what they really are. And ultimately, that's kind of, what I had to do with General George. And I had to, for me, I knew what I was going with him. It was just the journey for him and how he related to Walden, so.
For sure. So why don't you let us know, what do you have coming up after Walden comes out? And also, where should all of our listeners look for you, and what else should they be looking out for?
Well, I after I did Walden, I shot a comedy called Trust and Love, which is going to come out next year, and it's kind of a cool little movie that I shot in Malibu. And funny enough, no big names in it, but it was a fun movie to make. And it's about a record producer who's on his last legs, trying to create the last great album with a band that nobody gives a shit about, who are rejects from like a hair band from the 80s.
Okay.
And trying to make one last good album. Meanwhile, his wife wants a divorce. He's married to this younger woman. She wants a divorce. And the son comes along and says, Dad, I think I might be gay. And so he's having to deal with all of that. And he's got a brother who's a surfer dude who's trying to sort of like help him through all these trials and tribulations. But the brother's just so stoned most of the time that he doesn't know what's going on. And it's a very heartfelt comedy, and it's won like 20 festivals so far. So it's awesome. Really bizarre how well it's doing. So that comes out next year. The next movie I'm going to shoot in January, I'm doing a movie called The Sculptor with Andy Garcia starring. And it's a period piece in 57, and it's about Constantin Brancuș, the Romanian sculptor who lived in Paris, and he was friends with Nelson Rockefeller and Peggy Guggenheim. And it's a story about how he takes care of a little gypsy boy who's a pickpocket and has polio, and he wants to help save this kid's life before he's lost to crime. And ultimately, it's kind of based loosely on The Kid, Chaplin's The Kid. And that's what I'm doing next. And then after that, I'm off to Alabama to do a thriller called Due Process. So that's my the first
that is the broadest range of genres and films right there. That's something.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? I know. In terms of finding me, I mean, I'm terrible. I'm not very big on social media. I've got Instagram because my son forced me to put it on my phone, but I've never posted on it, as anybody can testify. Facebook, the only reason I went to Facebook is so I could keep my eye on my kids who live in Sweden. So I know if they're getting up to no good. And that's basically it, and the rest is, it's, IMDb is usually the, people check things out that way. But my feeling with the process is, and that's exactly what I love, the process is, if you get the chance, go in, tell a story, do the best you can. If it works for people, that's great. If it doesn't work, you move on to the next one.
Mhm.
And you just keep chasing it, trying to tell good stories and work with good people. That's all I want to do. I just want to work with good people, you know?
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing that too, because I mean you
Yeah.
are literally going project to project, so you are on a mission to make good stories and work with good people. I'm glad you stopped by here on your way to
It
all the
was,
other films that you're
Yeah.
working on. So thank you for this.
yeah, it was a blast talking to you guys, that's for
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you. So
Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.
yeah. So Walden's in theaters November 10th and on demand in digital December 12th. Make
Yeah.
sure you guys all check that out. And we will be definitely looking forward to all your future films. I just got to ask you, are you a history buff, an art history buff? Like, what is your draw with the art history pieces?
Yeah, well, art, yes, I love it. I mean, you know, I think everybody loves art, you know, to some degree.
Yeah,
Even if it could even be a Pollock. It doesn't have to be a Van Gogh, but for me, it's history. I just think there's so many great characters in history, and there's great mythology that you can play with, like I'm doing with the Piper. So yeah, there's so many. I mean, look at Ridley Scott's got Napoleon coming out, you know, the most unlikely of movies for a big audience, and yet it will be amazing because it's Ridley and it's Joaquin. So it, you know, and I love that. I love that we're doing all of that, and we should be doing all of that because I think younger people today, you know, I don't know if they stopped to read as much as probably we did as kids and pay attention to what history is and
sure.
all the great stories there. But it's nice that if they don't do it, then maybe we'll make the odd movie that they'll watch and enjoy. And then that's, you can't ask for more than that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for doing that. I think that that's important, like you said, and it exposes viewers to maybe to history that they didn't know or
Yeah.
never had thought about. So that I think that's really, really good.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, but thank you. And yeah, for everybody listening, like I said, November 10th, check out Walden in theaters, and we will be back next week with another episode. Everyone,
All
have a
right.
great night. Thank
All
you.
right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a